welcome back to Wednesday Night Live. I'm your award-winning host, Ralph Lillig, and we're glad to have you with us tonight. We have a couple of things, topics of discussion, and before we do that, as I do every week at this time, let me please remind you about Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center. Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center is a nonprofit pro-life organization with Christian values that has to do with mothers and their unborn babies. If you haven't already contacted them, won't you please call them at 478-HOPE, 478-HOPE. They're a small organization. They don't get the millions or billions of dollars that Planned Parenthood and other organizations such as theirs do. These people are about life, but they need your help. They're very small. They don't have much money. So if you would call them at 208-478-HOPE, see what you can do to help them, financially or otherwise. You'll be blessed, they'll be blessed, and you'll give compassion and hope to a mother and perhaps an unborn baby. Last year they had 3 really beautiful success stories. You can give them a call just to find out about their successes. They're about babies living, not dying. Well, a couple of topics that we want to cover tonight. The one that I'm going to lead off with, it's very difficult to impart this. I had a trailer, a professional trailer that I somehow missed in my hurry to get out of the house tonight, so I don't have the professional trailer. So I'm going to kind of wing it. But last week I told you about this degenerate play that's going to be here in our town starting this week. I think it's on the 24th at the old town, let's see, what did they call themselves? Old Town Actors Studio on North Main Street. I don't know how to express this, but one thing I had to do is I had to order a copy of this play. It's called Corpus Christi. Corpus Christi by Terrence McNally. Now, Terrence McNally is a homosexual. He's not just same-sex attracted. He is a practicing homosexual, whatever practicing means. And I'm assuming he's still married to his partner, who was something like 30 years younger than him or something like that. McNally's about 75 or 76. Thoroughly degenerate, and I say that based upon what he writes, what he thinks. I saw the trailer where he talks about how important it was for him to write this Corpus Christi. Now, Corpus Christi, I'm just going to read one of the. This is an excerpt from Time magazine, which will show you why Time magazine no longer exists. It says the most controversial and talked about play of the 1998 theatrical season begins. We are going to tell you an old and familiar story, but from that point on, nothing feels quite familiar again. What follows is a story that parallels the New Testament and is subject to nothing less than the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus. But McNally's Christ figure is a character named Joshua, a young man born and raised in Corpus Christi, Texas in the early 1950s. Different from the other boys because he is homosexual, Joshua grows up in isolation and torment as an object of scorn. He flees Corpus Christi in search of a more accepting environment, gathering along the way a group of disciples who are bound to him by his message of love and tolerance. I love the way the LGBTQ and all the other liberal left-wingers use that word tolerance. Boy, if it's their agenda, it's love and tolerance. If you object, well, you're obviously some kind of a homophobe or something worse. Let's see, his love and tolerance. Joshua delivers his Sermon on the Mount and officiates at a gay marriage ceremony, but inevitably his radical teachings, like Jesus, will not deliver him from his fate. Returning to Corpus Christi, he is betrayed by his lover, Judas, and crucified in front of the jeering throngs who hated him as a boy and still do. His plea that we look upon all souls as equal in the sight of God falls unattended. And then there's a quote here from Time magazine, a serious, even reverent retelling of the Christ story in a modern idiom, quite close in its way to the original. If the point is made, Jesus teaching is to make Jesus' teaching live for a contemporary audience, activist Christians should be hailing this play, not trying to suppress it. One of McNally's best, most moving, and personal works. His updating of the Christ story is witty, but not patronizing, as sober and cleansing as a dip in baptismal waters. And I would imagine that that's why the Time magazine no longer exists, because there's no truth in them. This is the most degenerate play I've ever read. Now, you know, I've been a member of Screen Actors Guild for more than 20 years. I've read a few plays, been in a few plays. I've never read anything, and I read it because I know my detractors will say, oh, Lillig, you don't know what you're talking about. It's wonderful. It's all about Christ. No, it's not. This is satanic, demonic, degenerate. I don't even, there aren't enough verbs, adverbs, adjectives, nouns, pronouns. There are not enough to describe what a degenerate piece of work this is. But what makes it even more disgusting is that it's being portrayed in our community, mostly a Christian community, as legitimate by a small group of actors, the Old Town Actors Studio, in their little studio on North Main. Seats 30, I understand, and I understand they have confirmed sales of 22 tickets, last I've heard. I ask you, I urge you, I beseech you to boycott this filth. But I ask you to go further than that. You know, I made a note to myself. Let me just read this. I think I read this to you last week. I'm going to read it again. It says, now this was from their advertisement or whatever it is, talking about Old Town Actor Studio. Old Town Actor Studio is proud to present Terrence McNally's Corpus Christi, powerful and affecting modern-day retelling of the Passion of the Christ. That is degenerate on the face of it. Where the author asks the question, if Christ came to us as a gay man, and right there you see the whole thing, this is satanic. It says if he went, it's degenerate from the very beginning. But if he came as a gay man with the exact same message of love, charity, and hope, and it's not the same message, would we as a society accept him, or would history repeat itself? A truly moving piece filled with humor, emotion, and a deep reverence for one of the most significant and transformative stories of all times. Now, if you don't have a pencil and paper handy, I'm going to give you a moment to get one, because I'm also going to tell you about a book that I think you may want to read. But I want you to have this phone number and call these people and let them know that there's no place in Pocatello for this kind of filth. Controversial plays? Yeah, sure. There's always room for that. Thought-provoking? Yes. This is neither. This is just filth. That's the best word you can use to describe the Corpus Christi. It is just filth. It has no place. And I know the liberal left wing, the great for hate folks, I'm sure they just love it because it's all about diversity. It's all about tolerance, unless you disagree with it. And then you're obviously, like me, you're some kind of a hater. This has no place in our community. And I would urge you to find out who the people are that are producing this, people who are supporting it with their money, and I would urge you to boycott them. Now let me just make this clear. You've never heard me before, and last week it was the first time I ever said this. I've had my run-ins with the homosexual, LGBTQ, same-sex attracted, however they want to portray themselves. I've had my run-ins with them. I've had death threats against me. I've earned their Pink Brick Award for being the worst hateful man in the whole city. We have some profound differences between the LGBTQ crowd and myself, between the great for hate people and myself, between some of the teachings of some of the so-called, well, some of the couple of churches here in town. Profound differences in the gospel message interpretation. And I don't usually point a finger unless I'm quoting something, and you've never heard me say to boycott any of these groups. But I'm asking you outright, we all probably know most of the organizations in town who are either owned by, managed by, or staffed by the LGBTQ people. A lot of them in civil service where they're safe from people like me who might be a detractor, where they're safe from anybody who may disagree with them, and they can throw bricks and throw stones and make comments, death threats like my wife and I have had, but they're okay because in civil service they're protected. Maybe it used to be maybe they were not quite as protected, although I don't agree with that. But the non-discrimination ordinance now makes it so that they're protected, quote unquote, in the public workplace. You cannot discriminate against an LGBTQ SSA person based on their proclivities. But I can tell you this, it's our money that fills their wallets that puts this kind of filth in front of us, and we don't need it. And so I would ask you, find out, if you don't already know, who's producing these, who are the people behind it, who are the people who are supporting it with their money, and don't give them your money. Keep your money in your wallet. And I would also ask you to call them. Call 478-6886. That's the Old Town Actors Studio reservation line, I guess. and tell them you're not happy with this. 478-6886. Tell them how you feel. Now, don't be arrogant. Don't be ugly. Don't use the kind of filth. This book, the filth in this, I can't even read any of it to you. It's that bad. Don't use that to them. Don't allow them to. I'm angry, and I think I'm very obviously angry that they would bring this kind of filth, and I don't mean to beat that word to death. I can't think of a stronger one, into our community. And so I would say, do not patronize the people who patronize this, that have brought this into our community. Now, for several years we've been getting the LGBTQ agenda shoved down our necks. The newspaper, ISJ, was one of their water carriers, carried all their water for them. Various writers for the journal, several local ministers have promoted this whole gay agenda, this whole LGBTQ agenda. They brought people from outside, and they forced this on us through the city council. And we have Steve Brown, the city councilman Brown, to thank for, who was the swing vote on the night that this travesty was cast upon us, the so-called non-discrimination ordinance. And so I guess what's happened now is the LGBTQ people have had one victory after another against civility, against decency, against Christian ethics, against the basics, the Mosaic law. They have had one victory after another. They recently won their case now with the court, so they can now have so-called gay marriage is now legitimate in this state. The Add the Words people are at it again up in Boise, and they're going to confront the legislature again to force us to add the words, the 4 words into the Constitution. As long as we put our money in their hands, they can afford it. They have multi-gazillionaires, like the guy who runs Apple Computers, the guy who runs the big coffee, Starbucks. They have these multi-gazillionaires who are also LGBTQ, and they're willing to put their money where their mouth is. They're willing to throw their money into this to force little tiny communities like us, who are overwhelmingly Christian, to just kind of shrink back and take it. But you don't have to spend your money to patronize these people. I urge you, do not spend one nickel at any of these groups that support this kind of filth. I know that they feel, the LGBTQ crowd feel emboldened because they've got the non-discrimination ordinance fully fascist on its face. It was unnecessary to begin with. It only protects one group against the rest of us, I guess. In other words, it takes our protections away from us. But they've won one victory at another, and now they feel emboldened. It's not enough that they teach it on our campuses. It's not enough that kindergartners can tell you homosexuals. I didn't know what a homosexual was until I was a teenager in high school. Now, maybe I was left out in the dark a little bit, but I lived in a town where we pretty much had a grapevine, but that wasn't part of the agenda for my youth. Now a kindergartner knows what a homosexual is. Why? What's the need for that? Why should they have to? Well, so that we can have same-sex parenting. Heather has 2 mommies, that kind of stuff. And so the agenda keeps pushing, and it keeps pushing. And it's unrelenting in forcing this degeneracy, this ungodly filth upon us. Well, this is one time when we can stand on our back legs and say, nope, we don't want it, we don't need it, take it somewhere else. Peddle it in Hollywood, take it to San Francisco, take it to Phoenix, wherever you want to, but we don't need it in Pocatello. So I urge you again, call them at 478-6886. Go down to the Old Town Actors Studio, and they're at 437 North Main. I went by there today trying to find this place. I didn't even know it existed, and it's stashed away among a bunch of little offices. Don't buy this. Don't support this with your dollars. Now, I'm sure that all 30 seats will be filled with the LGBTQ crowd, with the liberally liberated 21st century thinkers crowd from the university and School District 25, wherever they come from. But you don't have to be part of that. And I urge you to talk to the leadership in your church, whether it's your bishop, your stake president, your minister, your priest. Talk to them and ask them to talk to people about how this has no place in our town, nothing like this. Talk to your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues, your kids who are old enough to be getting influenced in our high schools, tell them no, this does not belong in Pocatello. Boycott this and boycott everybody who puts their dollars and cents into it to keep it alive. It's supposed to run for 5 days. So far, I guess they have 22 confirmed tickets. If that's all, then it's not going to last 5 days. Maybe they'll put it on anyway. And I tell you this because I read this filth, not because I just saw it someplace else and I don't like the premise. I read it. This is the most degenerate. Any minister who will stand up and defend this is not a minister of the God I know, the minister of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the minister of the gospel of Jesus the Christ. They may be some liberal left-wing loony, the minister of the 21st century relativity, but they are not a minister of the Lord Jesus Christ. And I would urge you to talk to these folks and tell them to tell everybody, have no part of this. All right, I'm so angry I could probably go on, but I won't. All right, well, do we have any time left? Yeah, we do. I've got a couple things I wanted to share with you also. One of the things that should be very disturbing to all of us, last week we had the tragedy in Paris, and the apologist-in-chief decided it wasn't important enough for him to send anybody to. He certainly was too busy to go to it. So nobody from the United States represented us. So a couple days later, after they could no longer stand the heat, John Kerry, can you imagine that buffoon represents our country? But he does speak French, and that's important. John Kerry went to Paris, and he brought John, what's his name, to sing some sweet song from the 70s. I forget. You've Got a Friend. Yeah, what was that guy's name? How quickly we forget. It's humiliating. We have been made a laughingstock of the world by this president and John Kerry and the rest of those fools on the left. Our Secretary of State takes this singer, balladeer, whatever he is, and he sings "You've Got a Friend" for the French people. And that's how America stands up for what's right, stands up for the good. Now, every time you see the apologist-in-chief and his Obaminist groups, you've seen this, it's well known now, unless you watch ABC, NBC, CBS, or CNN, or MSNBC. If you watch those, if those are your only source of news, then you probably haven't seen this. But the Obaminists will not use the words jihadists. They will use terrorist because they can say there are many types of terrorists. I watched this woman, she looks like some sterile Vassar reject with these horn-rimmed glasses or straight blonde hair, no makeup. She just looks about as cold as an iceberg. And somebody asked her, one of the reporters asked her, why doesn't the president say that these are Islamists, that these are Muslims? Well, he won't, because number one, he is a Muslim. I told you this before. I firmly believe he is a Muslim Marxist. And he has said many times in many ways, in fact, he says in The Audacity of Hope, in the book he wrote, in paraphrasing, if it comes down to a decision between America and Islam, he will always side with Islam. It's pretty hard not to think of the man with all the other things for the last 6 years. We didn't know him before the last 6 years. Nobody had ever heard of this guy. But for the last 6 years, here's a guy he is the most secretive president we've ever had. We still don't know who he is. We still do not know for genuinely where he was born. We know who his parents are. We know all that stuff. And we're pretty sure, those of us, I know I'm considered on the right-wing fringe. I don't believe he was born in Hawaii. I believe he's a Kenyan. That said, he got away with it, and now he's been laughing up his sleeve at us in this travesty that he had last night. Did you watch this? I think it was about an hour, so-called State of the Union. It's the same old stuff. He's still campaigning. The man has never led. He's been campaigning for 7 years. He has never stopped campaigning, and last night he was campaigning again with the same old worn-out phrases, the same old, and he made the comment about, I forget how it was, but something about he got elected twice. Oh, he said, I don't have to campaign anymore. I'm not running for anything. That's true. He's safe as can be. He can do whatever those things that he had to work for at the beginning, where he had to have Pelosi and Reid and his hatchet people, they went out and protected him in the first 4 years. Now he can just throw them out the window. He doesn't have to worry about it. You can't fire him. They're not going to imprison him, even though he's a criminal, in my opinion. So he can keep laughing at everybody. And then he'll retire with $400,000 a year, Secret Service, as an expense account, and he'll go on the speaking, the Speakers Bureau thing, and he'll make, I don't know, $100,000 a pop, $200,000 a pop, like Clinton does, and I mean, he's got it made for the rest of his life. He couldn't care less. I don't think the guy is worried about his so-called legacy. I think he's so busy laughing at us, and it's almost as if he's still smoking pot. You know how these pot smokers get the giddies. It's like he hasn't come down off one of those giddies. He can't stop laughing. Well, I kind of digressed, and I went off to talk about this because many of us are asking, how can it be? How can it be that Islam, the Muslims, the extremists, the terrorists, have brought the world to this point where we're all scared to death? We're afraid to leave our houses because some nutcase who wants to redeem the honor of the prophet might walk into the supermarket and blow himself up and take 50 people with him. And it's just as real, it's maybe more real in this little town than many other places. Because in our little town, where we have about 53,000 Pocatelans, maybe 11 or 12,000 in Chubbuck, but we all shop at the same markets, we all go to the same theaters, we all go to the same places, Jensen and so on. We are very vulnerable, and we have 2,000 Muslims at the university. Why 2,000 in this little town? What makes ISU so attractive? These are not health science students. These are not pre-med students. These are not students going to become physician assistants and nurses and physicists and all that. As far as I know, most of them are going for engineering degrees. Why here? Now, that is not to say that we don't have a fine engineering department here. We do. ISU has one of the best. We certainly have the best, if not the best, second or third in the entire nation, health sciences. I mean, nobody will dispute that. Our pharmacology college, one of the best in the nation. But these Muslims are not going to those schools. These 2,000 Muslims are here going to other programs. Why here? 2,000 in this little town is a formidable number if they have a so-called sleeper cell. Now, I'm not saying they do, but I wouldn't be surprised, not for 1 minute. I went into the market the other day, and one of the Muslim men walked in wearing his traditional garb. Why? He's living in the United States of America. It was a cold day. It's not like the sun was shining. He had to protect himself. It was a slap in the face. It was a thumb in your eye. We are the master race. We are the Muslims. We are Allah's children. We are the masters of the universe. And I'm going to slap you in the face by showing you that you can't do anything about it. Easy enough to take offense with that. And I have no doubt his two companions were dressed in typical Western garments. May or not. So how have we come to this position? How has it come to the point where our whole nation is walking scared? You can't drive any place now in safety. We're always talking about Islam, Muslims, the Prophet, all this stuff that has nothing. I remember when I was getting my background check. It took over a year to do this because they were very thorough, and I had to go in for a Q&A. And one of the questions they asked me is, "Are you now, or have you ever been, a member of the Communist Party USA or any other radical group whose intention it is to overthrow the United States of America or to undermine the Constitution of the United States?" Now, granted, this was almost 45 years ago, when we still believed in these things. Most of us still do. And one of the questions they asked me, and I was astonished by, and I was told it would come up. I wasn't surprised, but I was still astonished. One of the organizations that they named that they wanted to know if I was a member of was the John Birch Society. Now, you can't get much more patriotic or red, white, and blue American than the John Birch Society. But they considered, the people doing the background check, the LAPD, the City of Los Angeles, FBI, they considered the John Birch Society to be an organization who was trying to undermine our nation. And yet here we have Islam, who's it is an ideology as much as it is anything else. And the goal of every good Muslim, every faithful Muslim, they are ordered to be relentless in bringing Sharia to the world, including the United States of America. In other words, Sharia would replace our Constitution. Sharia would become the law of the land. We would no longer have our constitutional protections. We would have what Sharia says. We would no longer, you as I, as Christians and Jews, would no longer be able to practice because it would be an affront to Islam. And have you seen this? I'm going to get off the subject a little bit. Remember last week I showed you this photograph of this woman who was being executed by this imam because she didn't want to marry one of the Muslim men. So they executed her. Serves her right. Because Sharia says she has to do what she's told. If they wanted her to, she wouldn't. So she was shot in the head in public. Did you see this one that was up just a couple days ago? I sent it to a number of people. YouTube has taken it down. Gee, I wonder why. It's the public execution of a woman on a public, looks like a highway, but it certainly is a roadway, a street in Saudi Arabia. And there's this imam, I guess he is, in his traditional sheikh's outfit, his Arab garments, with one of those long scimitars that they have, the long curved swords. And he's kind of leaning on it for a while. The whole film takes about 6 or 7 minutes. And he is being protected, I guess you would say, from traffic is going by. Cars are driving on the street. It's broad daylight on a public street. Cars are driving by. And these uniformed police officers are standing there, I guess, to help him and certainly to protect him from traffic. And he's about to execute a woman who was accused of some kind of a loose accusation of abusing her child. We don't know we don't know if it was beating the child, we don't know. But she was accused of abusing her child. She's in the hijab, so you can never see any of her. But she is screaming, pleading for her life in Arabic. She's begging them, please don't kill me, in Arabic. And this Muslim, this cleric is telling her, you got to die, and I'm going to execute you. And finally, he has a little trouble trying to get hold of the hijab. There's a top knot on it that he finally gets it like a handle, kind of brings her over on her side, whack, kills her. After 5 or 6 minutes of screaming, she's done. She goes flat, he walks around to the other side, whacks her again, and then for good measure, whacks her 2 more times. Sharia. Can you imagine that in this country? Well, that's what they have in mind for us, Sharia. And yet, they are here, the Islamists, the Muslims who believe this stuff, they are here under our protection, under all of the protections of the Constitution that we've had for 234 years, and they are pushing their agenda. And they have millions upon billions of our dollars to do this. And so what are they doing? They're buying universities. Now we have 2,000 Muslim students at our university. Ours is a small university. They need the money. Are they buying our university? Is that why we've got this big push in town to make sure that they get the mosque, to make sure that nobody offends them, like the woman that says she was offended over at Walmart? Maybe she was. We don't know. All we know is what we read in the Idaho State Journal, and who knows what that means. Well, the purveyors of this stuff are buying our universities, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Duke, all of the major universities. They buy libraries for them, but they buy scholarships. They buy the universities. Has ISU been bought? I don't know. I'm curious. Who does background checks on these people? What do we know about these 2,000 students? What do we know to protect them? Does the police department have any way of having background information on these people to protect you and me? We have a very small police department, and they have their hands full with just regular street crime. How are they going to defend us against Islam? What are they doing to protect us? I don't know. And I'm certainly not indicting my brother officers, not for a minute. They have enough on their plate. I'm just wondering what protections you and I have if we have just half a dozen nut jobs in that 2,000. All right, well, I want to show you this film. Perhaps many of you have seen this lady. Her name is Brigitte Gabriel. She is originally a Lebanese. She's going to tell you her story in a moment. She was speaking at a Baptist church. I'm sorry. Speaking at a Baptist church in Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, and she can tell you much better than I can how this is happening, what's happening to our culture, and how Islam is going to win us over. They're going to take us one way or another, by force or by farce. They will take us. Josh, are we ready on that number one? Please pay attention to this.
chapter and how folks can participate in that.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Dr. Youngblood for hosting this. I want to thank all of you for coming tonight.
I'm Bill Korak of the Report Card, bringing truth to the classroom. We're at the First Conservative Church of Jacksonville, where Bridget Gabriel of Act for America is about to speak about radical Islamic subversion in American public schools. We join Randy McDaniels of Act for America in Jacksonville as he introduces Bridget Gabriel.
What you will hear about is threats from those who want to promote Sharia Islamic law. This is not a First Amendment issue that we speak about, but a Sixth Amendment issue, which says the Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. And those who support Sharia want to replace the Constitution and make it the law of the land. And those groups that we're looking at, most of the major groups in America, like CARE, Islam, NATE, the Muslim Student Associations, and others, are in fact enemies of our Constitution that promote Sharia. And we know this from evidence entered into a trial, the largest successfully prosecuted Hamas financing trial in U.S. history. $12.4 million specifically go to the families of suicide bombers. And the groups that were listed there are the major mainstream groups that our government continues to work with in many cases. The implications of the Holy Land Foundation trial proved three things. One, there was a subversive element in America that wants to replace our Constitution. Two, that it was a Muslim Brotherhood entity. And three, that the majority of the groups in America, as I just stated, were in fact those groups and part of it and are unindicted co-conspirators in that list. We have groups like CARE working in schools. Right now we're fighting a battle down in Tampa. 3 years this group has been speaking in schools, and CARE is one of the co-conspirators of the largest terrorism finance case in U.S. history, and CARE members were sentenced to 65 years in prison. 3 quotes, and one is from CARE member. Ibrahim Hoopa, the national spokesman for CARE, said, quote, "I'm not going to tell you that I wouldn't like for the government of the United States to become Sharia in the future. I'm not going to do anything violent to promote it. I'm going to do it through education, meaning the schools." Brigitte going to be talking about some of this. Dawanet, they said public schools are fertile grounds where the seeds of Islam can be sowed in the hearts of non-Muslims. And Shabir Mansouri, the group that is the Council on Islamic Education, the primary group responsible for information in all textbooks across the nation, said, quote, "I am waging a bloodless revolution in America's public schools, promoting world cultures and faiths. If you do not think that the enemy is going after the hearts and mind of your children, you're wrong, because that's where the cultural jihad is being waged." Thank you, and I look forward to speaking.
The reason why I am so passionate about this subject is because it has affected my life personally. As you saw in the video, I was born and raised in Lebanon, which used to be the only majority Christian country in the Middle East. We were open-minded, we were fair, we were tolerant, we were multicultural. We prided ourselves on our multiculturalism. We had open border policy. We welcomed everyone into our country because we wanted to share with them the westernization which we had created in the heart of the Arabic world. Muslims used to send their children to study in our universities because we had built the best universities in the Arabic world. They graduated and worked in our economy because we had built the best economy in the Middle East. Beirut became known as Paris of the Middle East, the banking capital of the Middle East. And we didn't even have any oil. We did, however, have brains. And then everything started to change in my country. Once the Muslims became the majority, especially with the influx of the Palestinians out of Jordan, they declared war on the Christians. And they formed their own army called Jaysh Libnan al-Arabi, the Arabic Lebanese army. And they started killing the Christians. My 9/11 happened to me in 1975, when the radical Muslims blew up my home, bringing it down, burying me under the rubble wounded, as they shouted, Allahu Akbar. My only crime was that I was a Christian living in a Christian town. I came to the United States and I thought I left it all behind me. I left the crazies over there. I met my American sweetheart in Israel. I married him. I came to the United States and I thought I'm going to start a new life in America. And I did. My husband and I had 2 children. We started our own little business in Virginia. And we were living the American dream until September 11th happened. And I remember watching the news on September 11th and the flashbacks that I had as I watched people being pulled from under the rubble, like my parents pulled me from under the rubble. People crying and wailing and screaming. I can remember my mother's screams, yelling my name, looking for me. I can smell the smoke as I watch the smoke on television. I know what that smells like. I know the smell of black powder. I know that smell of bombs. And I laid on my couch in my family room for 6 days. September 11th happened on a Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. And until Sunday, I was in my pajamas, debilitated, laying on my family room couch. It was flashback like a nightmare. And that's when I realized I need to make a difference. I cannot let this happen here. The problem that we are facing in this country is that people in this country are too afraid to connect the dots. Because if they do connect the dots, they're going to have to do something about it. Our elected officials are too afraid to discuss the situation. Our government failed to inform our people about what we are really dealing with immediately after September 11th. Everybody wanted to be politically correct. I mean, after all, we had elected officials speeding through red traffic lights just to get to the nearest mosques to tell the Muslims, it's not your fault, we know it's not your fault. Instead of calling the Muslim community on the carpet and saying, how could you harbor 19 radicals within your community? Don't tell me you didn't know about it. I'm going to shed a light on tonight for you. And I'm going to start with an organization called the Muslim Brotherhood. It's an organization that you heard a lot about, especially after last January with the revolution in Egypt. Not this January, but a year before that. You know, the Muslim Brotherhood, all the moderate Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is the oldest Islamic terrorist organization in the world, founded in 1928, and has 70 offshoot Islamic organizations, including Al-Qaeda and Hamas. Now, if the Muslim Brotherhood, if the Islamic world, Al-Qaeda, attacked us because of our foreign policy, because we are friends of Israel, then why was the Muslim Brotherhood founded in 1928? Israel wasn't even in existence. We had an isolationist foreign policy back then. We were not in the Middle East. The Muslim Brotherhood was created to usher back the Islamic Caliphate, which had ended 5 years prior. The Muslim Brotherhood wrote a plan in 1982. It's a 100-year plan for radical Islam to infiltrate and dominate the West. In the counterterrorism circles, this plan became known as the Project. The plan was written in Europe, and if you look at Europe today, you see how far they have advanced in their plan in the last 30 years. They wrote another plan for the United States. The plan for the United States was written in 1991 on how to destroy the United States from within. What makes the Muslim Brotherhood Project unique is it gives tactics and proposals as to how to infiltrate and dominate the West, how to use our open-mindedness against us, how to use our tolerance against us. They even give buzzwords on how you can do with Westerners, buzzwords that the West just gravitate towards. They talk about how to set up non-profit organizations and human rights organizations and maintain the appearance of moderation in order to advance radical Islam in the West. They don't call it radical Islam. That's actually a Western invention. They call it Islam. They talk about how to place Muslim interns at different levels of government on all countries, not only the United States, in all Western countries. How to work with like-minded progressive organizations that share similar goals. This is why when you look, for example, at the ACLU working with CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, you scratch your head and you think to yourself, how can these two organizations have anything in common? But the ACLU are used as the useful idiots in the hands of CARE. In the United States, they wrote a plan in the United States in 1991 about the destruction of the United States. This plan was presented as evidence, here is the plan, was presented as evidence at the Holy Land Foundation trial, the largest ever anti-terrorism trial in the history of the United States. It was a terror financing trial where 108 guilty verdicts were handed down. The plan's title is مذكرة تفسيرية للهدف الاستراتيجي العام للجماعة في أمريكا الشمالية, which means an explanatory memorandum for the strategic goal for the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States. Now, what makes this so important is that one paragraph I'm going to read to you out of this plan. And here's the paragraph. The process of settlement of the Muslim Brotherhood is a civilization jihadist process, which means a cultural process, with all the word means. The Ikhwan, or the brothers, must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and, quote, sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers so that it is eliminated and Allah's religion is made victorious over all other religions. Number 2 on the list is the MSA, the Muslim Student Association. The Muslim Student Association today has more chapters on American college campuses than the Democrats and the Republicans combined. The Muslim Student Association was launched in the United States in 1963. So for those of you who think this is recent activity by radical Muslims, only now we are waking up to realizing what they have been doing in the United States. Number 8 on the list is NATE, the North American Islamic Trust, which controls the majority of mosques in the United States. Number 22 on the list is IAP, Islamic Association for Palestine, which later became CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations. And they have many others. We have 29. I just touched the tip of the iceberg to give you an idea as to what we are dealing with and what we are talking about. So, how did they plan? As you can see, the Muslim Brotherhood has a military arm and has a peaceful cultural arm. You know, a social arm, kind of, if you want to say. So we know they want to attack us militarily. That's Al-Qaeda, we know the terrorists, you know, the lone wolf and all of that stuff. But what is even more dangerous than that is the way they are taking our country and infiltrating our country from within with us being asleep at the switch. Part of the Muslim Brotherhood project, they have educational foundations, they have media organizations, they have publishing organizations. They have decided, they have written in this plan every single way and every single loophole that they want to attack the United States in. From the education, from the media. Do you know that right now they are setting up an entertainment center in Hollywood for $20 million? Is it any wonder why we see now more and more Hollywood becoming politically correct? You're not going to see any more movies like Not Without My Daughter. Remember the movie Not Without My Daughter? You don't see movies like that anymore. That was 20 years ago. Those movies are not produced in Hollywood anymore. And there's a reason why. But what I'm going to focus on right now is how they are infiltrating our education system. Because this is how we are losing our children. They started on college campus, infiltrating the college campus with the flow from Saudi money. Because of the oil wealth, the Saudis started pumping millions into our universities, setting up Middle East study departments and political science departments, and appointing Arab professors who are anti-Israel and anti-America to brainwash our kids to make them believe America is bad, Israel is evil, and you know, the Islamic world is repressed and is oppressed because of America's imperialism. And the way they were doing it is they were using a loophole called Title VI program. Title VI program is a program instituted by our government after World War II in order to teach our children about foreign governments and foreign language so they may be an asset to our country, especially those who want to get into the State Department, the diplomatic field, go work in embassies, the CIA. That's what that program was all about, the Title VI program. So under the Title VI program, that's how the Saudis started funneling billions of dollars setting up these departments and appointing Arab professors who are brainwashing our children. To give you an idea of the Saudi infiltration into our universities, here's a list of the extent of their infiltration. King Fahd of Saudi Arabia donated $20 million to set up a Middle East study department at the University of Arkansas. $5 million donated to Berkeley's Middle East Study Department from 2 Saudi sheikhs linked to Al-Qaeda. Harvard received $22.5 million. Is it any wonder why Harvard invites President Khatami to speak at Harvard on September 11th, 2 years ago? Money buys a lot of influence. $28.1 million went to Georgetown. $11 million to Cornell. 5 million to MIT, 1.5 million to Texas A&M, 1 million to Princeton. Rutgers received 5 million share endowment. Also Columbia did receive that as well, but Columbia tried to lie to conceal the source of the funds. Other recipients of Saudi monies include UC Santa Barbara, Johns Hopkins University, Rice University, American University, University of Chicago, USC, UCLA, Duke University, Syracuse University, Howard University. You get the idea. From the Ivy Leagues down to the community colleges and everything in between. We pump the gas and they pump poison into the hearts and minds of our future generation, and that's why we must become energy independent. So, the Islamists figured out the strategy worked so well on college campus, they figured, why wait until the kids get to college? Why don't we start with the children in middle school? This way, by the time they get to be 18 years old and go to college, and they can vote, we already have them in our pocket. So the Islamic Council on Education, which later changed names like 4 or 5 times already, I do not know, I can't remember what their last name is, they started with an Islam course, and it's an Islam course to 6th and 7th graders in public schools. The course is 3 weeks long, where Muslim students have to memorize and recite verses from the Quran, adopt Islamic names, go fast for 1 day to experience Ramadan or the Islamic holy holiday, and go to a mosque on a field trip. And you know, when I started speaking about this as I would travel, people would say, absolutely not. Brigitte, you're exaggerating. I mean, you know, we have separation of church and state. I mean, after all, we can't even sing Christmas carols at school. We don't even have Christmas holiday. We have winter break. You know, they couldn't possibly be teaching this type of stuff. So I thought, you know what? There is nothing like show and tell. So here is the course. This is the Islam course. And the Islam course starts with, here's the teacher instructions. The teacher begins the class with, from the beginning, you and your classmates will become Muslims. You will be a member of a caravan. And she continues on with the explanation of the course. And she continues, and you can tell I'm skipping through a lot of stuff, saving you time and boredom. Dressing as a Muslim and trying to be involved will increase your learning and enjoyment. Finally, trying your best at all tasks will guarantee you an excellent grade and a more enjoyable time. So the teacher is already dangling the grade carrot in front of the children. And then here on the next page, they give them a choice of Islamic names. Here is the page you can choose Muslim names from. Abdullah, Khalid, Hassan, Hamza, Ibrahim, Arafat, Karima, Maryam, Noor, Amina, etc. They have girls' names and boys' names. And then, here's a wisdom card. Now, I chose this card. This is like practice cards, you know, like when kids are studying math. And, you know, you have cue cards, so you can memorize your lesson. They have them, you know, in all subjects. So this is called a wisdom card. And what I'm going to share with you today is a card about jihad. Now, the reason why I'm sharing this specific card with you is because we have become familiar with the word jihad because we hear terrorists use it a lot. I mean, after all, they have organizations named Islamic Jihad, Al-Mujahideen. Every time you watch a video of a suicide bomber that he pre-taped before he blew himself up, he talks about why he's dying fi sabil al-jihad, in the path of jihad, or jihad fi sabilillah, jihad in the path of Allah. So the word jihad is basically one with terrorist activity. So here's what they're teaching our children about jihad. And by the way, jihad is mentioned in the Quran 40 times. 36 times out of 40 as a military struggle, a holy war against the infidels in order to either kill them or subjugate them. Here's what they're teaching our children about jihad. A jihad is a struggle by Muslims against oppression, invasion, and injustice. So, if these words sound familiar to you, it's because these are the talking points of Al-Qaeda. Every time you hear Al-Qaeda issuing a press release about why they're fighting the United States, what do they say? We are fighting against American oppression. We are fighting against injustice. We are fighting against invasion. You hear that from Hamas in particular, the Palestinian Authority. Why suicide bombers and Hamas and all those Palestinians, you know, blowing themselves up? We are fighting oppression. We are fighting injustice. We are fighting occupation. So what we are seeing in public schools today is basically the talking points of our enemies being fed to our 6th and 7th graders in the name of diversity and multiculturalism, teaching them about religion, that are the talking points of our enemy, paid for by our tax dollars in our public schools. This is what's happening in our public school system. This is unbelievable what is happening, that we have allowed it to get to this point. Parents were not paying attention because parents asked little Johnny and little Sally when they came home from school, "Oh, honey, did you do your homework?" "Oh, sure, Mom, I'm finished. I can go play now." That's the extent of it. You have parents working 2 jobs, not paying attention to what's happening in the public schools. A lot of these courses, this is a state education curriculum. This is a state-approved education. And this is why we are so concerned about what's happening in the country. This is why we need to develop the backbone to say what needs to be said and throw political correctness in the garbage.
All right, so that's Brigitte Gabriel. She does a lot of speaking. She is the one who founded, I think she's the CEO and president of ACT for America, ACT for America. And you can go on, just Google it, go on ACT for America site and learn more. And this is the basic thing. She covers a lot. There are actually chapters of ACT for America around the country. A friend of mine, one of the authors of one of the books that I've recommended to you, Dr. Stephen Kirby, is a chapter leader in Iowa. Now, remember they were talking about the children, they have this 1 week or 2 week course, and they are to be Muslims, and they're going to be part of a clan. Here's a photograph. You can't see it. I don't expect you to. I'm going to describe it to you. And by the way, when I was talking about the woman who was murdered in the public street in Saudi Arabia, I said she was wearing a hijab. No, she was wearing a burqa. Her whole body was covered. Now, in this photograph, you have these kids. They look like they're maybe 5th graders, 4th graders, and they are being indoctrinated, as Brigitte Gabriel is talking about. The little girls are wearing the hijabs without veils. The little boys are just in standard Western garb. And in this particular part of their training, they're taught how to pray the Muslim prayer with their hands out in front of them. This is in a public school that is paid for by our tax dollars. This particular school happens to be, I think it's in Massachusetts, but they're all over, especially in the East. They're outside of California. There aren't too many. There may be 1 or 2 in Arizona, maybe some in Colorado. I'm not sure, but they're not that much out here in the West. Back east, they're rife with these things. Our children, our American children, are being indoctrinated, and we're not even allowed to mention the name of Jesus the Christ in schools. We can't bring a Bible on campus, and yet they're bringing the Quran and they're teaching them to be Islamists, to be Muslims. There's something very wrong with this picture. Very quickly, I'm going to show you one other film, and this film is by another former Middle Easterner. This is Raymond Ibrahim, and this is from Prager University. And we have just barely enough time to show it. If we don't get to finish it, God bless you. I'll see you next week.
Is the most persecuted religious group in the world today? The answer, in terms of sheer numbers and sheer horror, might surprise you. It's Christians, specifically Christians living in Muslim-majority countries, countries where Christians often preceded Muslims by centuries. I'm not talking about war on Christmas type harassment. I'm talking about know your place or we're going to kill you persecution. Astonishingly, the Western mainstream media barely acknowledge what is happening. Let's look closer at this issue. It tells us a lot about the world we're living in. 100 years ago, 20% of North Africa and the Middle East, the birthplace of Christianity, was Christian. Today, Christians make up 4% of the population. Much of that decline has occurred in the last decade. In essence, Muslims are rendering North Africa and the Middle East free of Christians. Take Egypt, for example, my ancestral homeland. In just the past 2 years, tens of thousands of Christian Copts have left Egypt. And many others want to leave, but they simply cannot afford to. Why they want to leave is no mystery. On New Year's Day, 2011, the Two Saints Church in Alexandria was bombed, leaving 23 Copts dead and 97 injured. In recent years, dozens of Coptic churches have been attacked, many burned to the ground. In August 2013 alone, the Muslim Brotherhood and its supporters attacked and destroyed some 80 churches. Unfortunately, Egypt is more the rule than the exception. Hundreds of Nigerian churches have been destroyed in recent years, with especially deadly attacks reserved for Christmas and Easter church services, leaving dozens dead or mutilated. Churches have been bombed or burned in Iraq, Syria, and just about every place in the Middle East where churches still exist, except Israel. Christian businesses have been torched, Christian girls have been kidnapped, sold as child brides or slaves, and had acid thrown in their faces for not being veiled. Anyone born a Muslim who converts to Christianity faces jail and possibly execution. The list of fresh atrocities by Muslims against Christians grows longer almost every day. Even in Muslim countries often portrayed as moderate, Morocco, Indonesia, Malaysia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Christian minorities are under legal pressure not to build churches or evangelize. The Christians in these Muslim countries are often identical to their co-citizens in race, ethnicity, national identity, culture, and language. There is no political dispute between the Christians and Muslims, no land dispute. Vastly outnumbered and politically marginalized, these Christians simply wish to worship in peace. Instead, they are hounded and attacked. So then, why is this happening? And why is the media making so little mention of it? The first question is easy to answer. Christians are being persecuted in Muslim countries because they're Christians, or as the Quran puts it, infidels. That is, non-Muslims who are regarded by many fundamentalist Muslims as inferior. As a fundamentalist interpretation of the holy books of Islam has grown in the last 50 or so years, Christians have suffered, and in recent years they have suffered terribly. I document this in my book, Crucified Again, exposing Islam's new war on Christians. If this were happening to any other group besides Christians, it would be the human rights tragedy of our time. There would be loud worldwide calls for action. But the silence in the mainstream Western media is, as they say, almost deafening. Why? Because Muslim persecution of Christians throws a wrench in the media's narrative that Muslim violence is a product of Muslim grievance. That grievance is, first and foremost, portrayed as the sin of European colonialism and alleged American imperialism. In the Muslim world's mind, those two sins are personified by the Jewish state of Israel, a nation the Muslim world believes was forced upon it by the colonial powers of Europe following World War II and is currently supported by the United States. Much of the Western world and the Western media have largely bought at least some of this narrative. Here's how it works. Because Israel, with the backing of the United States, is stronger than its Muslim neighbors, the media, while not defending Islamic terrorism, often portray terror against Israel, America, and even Europe as the actions of understandably angry underdogs fighting for what they deem justice. But what happens to this media narrative when Islamic terror is directed against a minority weaker than them? In this case, the millions of indigenous Christians throughout the Islamic world. The answer is that, rather than abandon this narrative, the media just don't report Muslim persecution of Christians, except for the most sensational cases. That's why you probably don't know that there are barely any Christians living in Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, nations where Christianity once thrived, or that this is happening in Egypt, Iraq, Iran, and even Lebanon. So yes, Christians are indeed the most persecuted religious group in the world today. But reporting it would violate the media's narrative of Christians as persecutors and Muslims as victims. I'm Raymond Ibrahim, author of the Al-Qaeda Reader for Prager University.